Empire.
Hello and welcome to my podcast. Do me a favor, subscribe to the John Keim Report wherever you get your podcasts. You're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. You can find us there as part of Empire Media, AMPIRE, and I hope you know how much I always appreciate you tuning in. Today, I'm joined by ESPN college football analyst Greg McElroy. He's very familiar with all these college quarterbacks. I wanted to bring him on to talk about Sam Howell, what he saw from him. He did a lot of his games in college, what he thinks of him now, and also how he compares to the rest of this college football, the quarterback class in this year's draft, because, of course, Ron Rivera said that they would not discount the idea of taking another quarterback. Doesn't mean it's going to be in the first round, could be in the later rounds. There are one or two guys that McElroy thought would be interesting for them late. Ceiling's not very high, but it's a guy that may fit for them as a, kind of a back, develop into a good backup type, whatever. So we get into all that, and we talk about Hendon Hooker. He's very familiar with Hendon Hooker, and he's a person of interest for the Commanders. Not at 16, so just relax there. But he is somebody that's going to be in for a visit. They do like him because they're bringing him in for a visit. They want to know more about him medically. If he's there in the third round, would you take him? Well, if they do, then I have McElroy here to talk about that. What could you expect? What does he think of him? Knows him very well, did a lot of his games. That's what I'm going to get into with Greg. I have nothing else to go on right now because that's it. So let's get to my conversation with ESPN college football analyst Greg McElroy. And by the way, you can follow him on Twitter at Greg McElroy, McElroy. He also hosts a radio show in Birmingham, Alabama. There you go. Here's my conversation. Did you know the largest ropes course and zipline park in the country is right here in the DMV? Located in the heart of Montgomery County, the Adventure Park at Sandy Spring combines climbing and ziplining to create an aerial obstacle course unlike any other. With challenges anywhere from 10 to 75 feet in the air, there is something for all skill levels. Looking for some family time or the perfect date night before football season starts? You can even climb and zip line under the stars. Would you rather keep your feet on the ground? Give axe throwing a try. With their projector systems, you can throw at traditional targets, play tic-tac-toe, connect four, or even hunt zombies. Listeners of this show can get $5 off any ticket by entering the code KEIM23DC at checkout. That's Keim, Keim 23DC. So there you have it, folks. Climbing, ziplining, axes, food, and bonfires right in your backyard. The weather is warming up, so it's the perfect time to head outside and join the adventure at www.theadventurepark.com. That's www.theadventurepark.com and enter promo code KEIM23DC. Greg, I want to start with Sam Howell because the whole discussion around the Commanders does revolve around Howell and what they think of him, and they are legitimately intrigued and like him. But I am curious, I always like asking people, first of all, what were your thoughts about him coming out in the draft as a player?
Well, it kind of started when we had Sam, probably 6 or 7 times. It felt like we had North Carolina there for a while. It felt like we had, when Mac Brown got the job, it's like, oh, we are all in on North Carolina for whatever reason. Our crew, because I was based in Charlotte at the time, like, hey, we'll just bounce over. We'll do UNC. It'd be no problem. So we had him a lot. And I've always been very impressed with just how prepared he was as a high school player to make the jump to college. Now, the one thing I would say about his college career is it was pretty steady. There was no significant leap in his last year. You can make a case, maybe statistically speaking, his best year in some ways and most impressive year because he was so young doing it might have been his true freshman year. So I had kind of gone into the draft process and gone to Mobile to see him at the Senior Bowl, not expecting to be blown away, being more, why did you not get significantly better? That was kind of my big question. And then I saw him at the Senior Bowl, and to be honest, that group of quarterbacks at the Senior Bowl that year, less than stellar, to say the least. It was a group that, I mean, for the most part, guys that were going to be in the mid-range, third, fourth, fifth round. Some were saying Malik Willis was going to be the star of the show, and that just never really materialized. And I actually came out of Mobile thinking that Sam Howell was probably the best guy available.
Really?
There in Mobile, and partly because there was inclement weather. It was really bad. The first day, I mean, it was awful. Yeah. And his ball never really was that affected. He threw the tightest spiral. His ball placement among the quarterbacks was among the best. And I actually came out of that week thinking his arm was quite a bit stronger than I had originally thought. I think his comparable in the NFL is Baker Mayfield as far as his natural skill set. Now, Baker may be a little more mobile, but similar with their size, similar with their build, and similar also with their release, where even though he's not the tallest guy, his release is high, so he plays a little bigger than he is. I really like him. I've always really kind of appreciated his approach to the game as well. And think if given the opportunity with the right supporting cast, could be a very effective starter.
And when you say you've always been impressed by his approach, what specifically are you talking about?
I just think he was mature beyond his years a little bit, and it was mostly evident with how he played as a true freshman. I mean, you're a kid in Charlotte that had grown up a North Carolina fan. You're supposed to revitalize the program. All this pressure, the weight of expectations are on your shoulders, and you can never escape it. Now, let's not get it twisted. Charlotte, North Carolina is not exactly, the sports capital of the world. It's not like for instance, a kid in Tuscaloosa is leading the Crimson Tide to a national championship. It's not quite the same. The amount of pressure that's on you when you go to Charlotte as a North Carolina quarterback, can you disappear a little bit? Maybe. But he could never really escape it. And I thought he performed really, really well under the expectations that were put upon his shoulders when he decided to call North Carolina home and staying home. Had he gone to Florida State and performed the way he did, which is where he was originally scheduled to go, I don't think I would have been as impressed, but knowing that you are the chosen one, you're the guy that's supposed to get this program going and to perform as well as he did, I thought was really admirable.
When you watch him and knowing what you know about, college quarterbacks and also the NFL, what kind of a system do you think would fit him well? What style of system? Because they are switching. They went from Scott Turner's to Bieniemy, more of a West Coast offense now, and I think they seem to like that for him. What do you think?
I like West Coast. I think because in West Coast, you have to have some natural athleticism. A lot of the things are built in. So if for whatever reason the guy's unblocked, you have to buy a little time and deliver the ball to the guy that will eventually come open based on, disappearances and coverage because of pressure. And I think obviously he can push the ball down the field. His arm is not necessarily a liability, but his arm is not something that would lead off the scouting report on what Sam Howell can do. For instance, when Josh Allen takes to the field, that you better cover guys for 8 seconds, 60, 70 yards downfield because he can make the throw. Sam Howell's going to have to be a guy that plays in rhythm and a guy that's going to have to get the ball out on time. And the West Coast offense is designed to, let your feet speak to you. When you hit 5, deliver. When you hit 5 and a hitch, deliver. When you hit 5, you don't like 1, you move to 2, hitch, boom. It's just your feet have to be completely in line with your progressions. And I think Sam Howell is well equipped to be able to handle that offense, probably more so than what they ran under Turner and what some other teams have done as far as, digit system or some of the other systems that are used throughout the league.
And it's funny because they have talked a lot about his footwork since they drafted him. And that was one of the things they wanted to clean up. I think that's why they feel he's in a better place, because they feel like they've corrected that, because it is hard. It's hard to get that timed up. I mean, there is an adjustment period with that, because every system can be a little bit different with it.
Well, and part of the challenge coming from the offense that he came from at North Carolina, you're in shotgun, and it's very much a read-based system, meaning the receivers are told to run vertical, and if for whatever reason they can't get behind the defense, they settle it down. So as a quarterback, you don't really allow your feet in that system to talk to you. Okay. You kind of just buy time. What's he going to do? What's he going to do? Boom. You know what I mean? So it wasn't really a system that would be predicated on rhythm or pure progression reads. So in the West Coast system, it's very, very simple. Now, did they naturally have away from rotation reads? Sure. If the safety spins down to the right, you throw to the left. Safety spins down to the left, you throw to the right. If it's quarters, you have this option. If it's man, you have this option. Yes, there are obviously rules within the rule, and there are alerts all the time in a West Coast system, but most of the West Coast system is going to be pure progression. So this is number 1, this is number 2, this is number 3, and here's your outlet. And your feet will speak to you all the way through that. And you're identifying defenders and finding zones and finding matchups, but your feet will kind of take you to where you need to go. And that's the offense that I was most comfortable in. It's the offense that I know the best, and it's an offense that I think is still tried and true. I think it's the best offense in football. I've always felt that way. So I just think it's the most quarterback friendly offense you can have, because there are rules that have been used for 40 years and are somewhat in many ways unchanged.
So when you look at him, and you said if he's surrounded by the right cast, like what do you think it would take for him to be successful? Because again, they are rolling with him unless he proves that he shouldn't be rolled with.
Well, obviously in a West Coast system to work to it at its best, I mean, you got to have a weapon at running back that can be dynamic in the passing game. Washington has that. You have to have a speedster at Z. Washington has that. A guy that can take the top off the defense at any one given point. And Terry obviously fits that mold. I don't need to tell Commander fans that. I think some other areas that you would love to have in the West Coast style without knowing their personnel like the back of their hand, a very reliable tight end is always really important. In the West Coast system, there are man zone conversions. Having a tight end that's capable of understanding that and being friendly would be very valuable. Like I said, without knowing their personnel like the back of my hand, I don't know if they have that, but I do know in this year's draft, assuming tight end's probably not going to be at the top of their list, but tight end is gettable in this draft. Very, very gettable. So I think those would be the 3 pieces if I'm building a West Coast offense from scratch. If I can get speed at Z, if I can get a tight end that is really, really good as it relates to creating one-on-one matchups and being able to create holes and feeling in the zone, being able to uncover if they are covered in the zone defense. And then a running back that can also contribute in free release passing attack. I think those would be 3 aspects that I'd really like to start. And naturally, with what Washington has, they can check some of those boxes.
Yeah, and they have Logan Thomas at tight end. Some questions about him coming off an injury 2 years ago at the ACL. Is he back to where he was? We'll see. But it is a good draft for tight end. So like this is you can get one in that top several rounds there if you wanted to. So that is a possibility.
And Logan's a quarterback too. I mean, at his core, I mean, he played quarterback at Virginia Tech and has a good understanding of, I mean, he can get with Sam and say, hey, Sam, what'd you see? Sam can articulate what he saw as a young quarterback. That's really valuable. But to have a guy that's been there when the bullets are flying and you're facing that live rush, having a guy that's been there at tight end, I think is really valuable. And Logan made that transition years ago. So it's not like he's taken a snap in a while, but either way, at least he's been in his shoes before. So assuming he can come back from injury, he'll be in good shape.
What level do you think Howell could get to? And the other thing is, I'm going to point out too, they also have Jacoby Brissett who can challenge him for that job. Sure. But it still starts and ends with if Howell's doing his job, they're going to go with him. So what level do you think he can get to?
I don't know. It's a difficult question. Is he going to be a top 5 quarterback in the league? Probably not. Can you win a lot of games with him? Yeah, I think you can do that with the right system in place. Can you get to the playoffs with him? I think so. Is he going to be Jalen Hurts? Probably not. Does he ever have that upside that we talked about already with his lack, I guess, of progress in college? Is there more in the tank? I don't know. I think there are limitations there. And ultimately, and everyone wants Pat Mahomes. Everyone wants Josh Allen. Everyone wants Justin Herbert. Everyone wants Jalen Hurts. Yeah. Who wouldn't?
Who doesn't?
Right. But those guys are pretty few and far between. Right. When I think he could have a year similar to Tua Tagovailoa, and Tua surrounded with really good supporting cast, really innovative offensive philosophy, play in rhythm, play on time, not be forced to throw the ball 75 yards downfield, understand his own limitations and the importance of getting the ball out and anticipating throws. I think a year like that is certainly within reason. Other guys that would come to mind, I already referenced Baker Mayfield.
Right.
I think Baker has won a playoff game, and Baker, albeit has maybe fallen on hard times these last couple of years, but guy can still play at a pretty high level, and has at times, just has not done so from season to season to season to season. So I think that there's plenty of upside there, but a top 10 quarterback would probably be as good as you're probably going to get. I'm not sure you're ever going to have, a guy that's in the conversation for the MVP.
Right. And that leads us to the next one, which is because Ron Rivera is like, they haven't ruled out quarterback at 16. I think it might be difficult because I don't know who's going to be there, but they are looking at quarterbacks. They're having Hendon Hooker in for a visit. Some of that's medical related. You want to see, but I do think there'd be interest there. So how would you compare Howell to this class? And are there some guys where you say at 16, if this guy is there, you got to take him?
No, I would not go on Hendon Hooker at 16 at this point.
Now, and I think for him, you're talking a couple rounds later.
Sure. I don't think he's going to be there.
Right.
Assuming his knee checks out, which I think they will. I think someone's going to fall in love with his personality. The guy's he's a great kid. I mean, he really just a really first-class guy that I've been real fortunate to, having covered the last couple of years, just a story of perseverance, a guy that was beaten out for the position, just kept grinding and ultimately got his shot because of a rolled ankle. And next thing you know, he takes the reins and the rest is history. So I really admire him because in an era where everyone's transferring and, looking for the next best spot, the second you have disappointment, you're out the door. He stuck with it. And ultimately now it's going to pay off. I wouldn't be shocked if someone tries to snag him in the late first round just to try to secure that 5th-year option,
right.
Knowing how beneficial that would be if he does turn out to be a dude. But I think with all these quarterbacks in this class, while there are some really, really good players, I think Bryce Young and CJ Stroud are a cut above. I think Anthony Richardson is all upside, very little productivity based on the tape, very inconsistent based on the tape, but the raw horsepower is there. Will Levis is similar. The raw horsepower is there, even though the tape doesn't necessarily always reflect that. Hendon Hooker, you can make a case with the exception of the top 2, is the most productive, but I also think his offense doesn't really translate that well because so much of it is based on some tempo. So much of it is based on pre-snap reads and being able to identify leverage before the snap. And there's not as much pure progression that you're going to have to do in the league that you do there at Tennessee. Doesn't mean it can't translate. It just means that there are question marks about that being a real natural transition. So I personally, if I were Washington in this draft, I would steer clear. I would try to build around Sam Howell at the moment, because I think Sam Howell, for what you're paying him and for the likelihood of the guys that are coming out next year's class is really strong.
It is.
So I would just resist the urge right now and then maybe go all in next year on a guy. If you don't feel like through 16, 17 games this year, Sam Howell is your guy for the future, then you punt and you go on a guy in 24.
And it's funny because with Hooker, I wonder too if they went that route. And again, I think like they're not taking him at 16, but it would be like if he somehow fell into the second round, you want to acquire another second round pick, or if If for some reason he slides all the way to third, which would be hard to see, that maybe you have really good value there. We'll see. But, I'm not sure he would even play. So I wonder if in their eyes, they'd look at him and like, hey, maybe he's your guy for 24 if Howell doesn't work out. And if he does, then you got another guy that you can maybe trade. I don't know. Do you like that kind of strategy, or would you say like just find guys now to build?
Yeah, here's my thing. I look at everything, and if you're going to roll the dice, why would you roll it in the second round or late first? If I'm going to roll the dice, give me Jake Haener out of Fresno State. I can get him in the 4th or the 5th because he's undersized, but the guy's a grinder. Like, he reminds me a little bit of Heineke. Not necessarily going to blow you away measurable wise, but real accurate. Plays in a system that does have some roots in NFL concepts, and came back and played last year on a broken leg. I mean, the guy had tib fib, said his season was over.
Right.
And next thing you know, he's playing with basically an air cast because he loves the game so much. Now, I know he didn't necessarily make the best impression at the Senior Bowl, but having been around the guy, I think there's something there. And I'm not going to say he's Kirk Cousins, where you take a guy at 2 overall and then you take a guy in the 4th round, and the 4th rounder ultimately becomes the guy. I don't know if that's necessarily the case, but if I'm going to roll the dice, I'll roll the dice on the background guys as opposed to reaching early, because I don't have to have one.
Right.
It's not a game changer right now. I don't have to have one. Yes. Am I 4th in the division right now? Possibly. Yeah, probably. But is the division pretty competitive beyond Philly? Yeah, I would say so. Right. And I think you can be competitive, and who knows, stars align. You make the playoffs with Howell. Well, you have a 4th round guy now, or 5th round guy that you're developing. So the guys I'd be interested in if I were Washington, Max Duggan at TCU would be a guy I would definitely have some conversations with, get him day 3 and figure it out. Jake Haener would be another guy that I would be looking at, and Aiden O'Connell from Purdue. Those would be the 3 guys that, okay, hey, we have Howell, we have Brissett. Here's our 3rd option, and maybe we strike gold on the guy late in the draft that now has a chip on their shoulder. So those guys were all uber productive at the college level. Will it translate? It's to be determined, but 4th round, 5th round draft capital, it's no big deal, I don't think, if you're looking at a potential safety valve at quarterback if the first 2 guys you have don't work out.
Right. And my take would always be that you can just like the Packers used to do, you can always trade a guy and get more picks back if he becomes that good. Or if he develops that well and Howell becomes really expensive, now you have a guy in your roster. So there are ways to look at it, but I'm with you. Like, I would look at it more later in the draft as a guy, like maybe you strike it with him, and if nothing else, you have another backup that you're developing for a couple of years from now.
Yeah, but I also too, part of my issue with the 3 aforementioned players, like if you're going to take a guy, now it's all about upside, right? Like, you got to find some upside. And I just, all those guys, I don't know if those are NFL starters.
Okay.
I think they're solid backups, possibly. They might be a spot starter here and there. They might be a situational starter here or there, but I don't know if they're going to necessarily be, if the ultimate goal is to find the next Patrick Mahomes, I'm not sure you're going to find it with any of the aforementioned guys.
Right.
But you got a guy that's solid, and his floor is probably not going to be that low. So you got to decide. You already have a solid guy in Howell. He's solid. Floor's not very low, but I don't know if the ceiling's that high either. Right. Do you want to roll the dice in the second on the 2nd or 3rd day and go with the guy that is somewhat similar? I don't know. That's up for you. That's up for you to decide. But that would kind of be my approach in looking at all those aspects of it, because there's not really that guy down the draft that has that crazy upside. Okay. The one that you might be able to say is Dorian Thompson-Robinson out of UCLA, maybe because of his athleticism. He can give you a little bit more. But, Jake Haener, I think he's got a chance to become a starter someday, but I don't know if he's ever going to be a top 5 guy. Okay. I think Clayton Tune at Houston, similar, solid, steady. Stetson Bennett, I don't necessarily love him as a prospect, but I think you just look at him, and I just don't know if there's that back of the draft guy with crazy upside that you see from time to time when evaluating draft boards.
And it's funny because one of the things that Rivera talked about at the owners' meetings was watching the Niners with Brock Purdy and hoping that Howell can be their version of Purdy. Do you look at Purdy as a guy who is surprised people, or did he land in the right spot for him? Or is it both?
I mean, let's be honest. I mean, the guy struck gold.
Yes, he did.
I mean, you walk into, I mean, and look, he had to execute and make the throws and did, right? But you walk into a situation like that, I mean, it's ready-made to be amazing. For instance, Dak Prescott. Let's use that example for a moment. We'll keep it within the division. And I love Dak and have covered Dak and know Dak personally and have played golf with Dak. And I love him. I do. I think he's a great guy and a really good player. But when he stepped into the starting role, that Dallas Cowboys roster was arguably the best in the league. And the offensive line and run game, without question, was, if not the best in the league, no worse than second or third. So he walked into an ideal situation. Now, as Dak has progressed in his career, there have been some phenomenal moments. But, he's kind of hit that leveling off point right now. Can he take it to the next level? I don't know. So Brock Purdy, yes, things were really good last year. But were they really good based on expectations? Partly, probably. Were they really good based on his supporting cast? Yes. And if that supporting cast, say George Kittle retires, Deebo Samuel, misses 6 weeks with a hamstring, Christian McCaffrey misses 6 weeks with a hamstring. If those guys are gone, Ayuk's out. For whatever reason, all those complete game-changing difference makers disappear. Can Brock Purdy do it on his own? And the answer in my eyes is probably not.
Right.
It doesn't mean that, he's not a good player. It just means if I'm going to make my franchise, if I'm going to bank on the future of my franchise, because I know at some point I'm going to pay this guy. I have to pay this guy a lot of money. It might be a quarter of the salary cap by the time it gets down to it. Who knows where it's going? Who knows how it's all going to end up? But if I'm going to have to put significant financial capital in this guy's pockets, that means I'm not going to be able to surround him with that same talent. So do I really want to invest this much in a guy that doesn't have that upside? I think that's the question mark, because eventually you're going to have to get to a point where you can cut a Tyreek Hill loose and the offense doesn't skip a beat. You still win the championship. And obviously everyone's looking for that next Patrick Mahomes, and that's impossible to find because I think he's the best ever as far as physical skill set is concerned. But man, I'm not looking for the next Brock Purdy.
Right.
Right.
And I think
I know the stars have to align for Brock Purdy to be who he was last year.
Right.
And I don't know if I can guarantee that I can make sure those stars align on a year in, year out basis.
It's a lot of stars align. Just a couple more, and I appreciate the time. So let's stay in the NFC East. First of all, you're a Bama guy. You surprised by what Jalen Hurts has done? And how do you look at these quarterbacks in this division besides what we talked about with Howell?
Well, we kind of hit Dak already. Yeah, we kind of hit Dak already. Right. Well, we hit Dak already a little bit. I mean, I think Dak's still a good player. I think he gets a little too much heat. You're the starting quarterback of the Dallas Cowboys. If you don't win the Super Bowl every year, you stink.
Right.
I don't think that's necessarily fair. Romo endured the same criticism. I thought Romo was really good too.
Yeah, I agree.
So as a Cowboy fan growing up, I was always irritated by how many of my friends wanted to bench Romo in favor of the next flavor of the week.
Yeah.
Dak, I think, endures similar criticism, but I think some of it is reasonable. There were moments last year in particular where the decision-making was not what you want it to be. Jalen, shocked at how good he's become. Dynamic athlete, has always been a dynamic athlete. The thing that was missing with him at the college level is he took the field at Alabama scared to make a mistake because he had Tua Tagovailoa breathing down his neck, and he knew if he threw 3 picks, guess what? You're getting yanked.
Right.
In comes Tua, and you're riding the bench the rest of your career. So he was very, very hesitant and gun shy in the pocket throughout the course of his college career. He relied solely on his athleticism early in his career. And then he was benched in favor of Tua. He was able to go in and get mop-up reps where the game wasn't in balance. You throw a pick, who cares?
Right.
It doesn't matter. You throw a pick, they win, 55-10
right.
as opposed to 55-3. So he could take chances that year and became a much better player as a result. And then that confidence that he built that year carried over into Oklahoma.
Yeah.
He had a remarkable year. The question was he the product of a really quarterback friendly system? And he gets to Philadelphia, the competitiveness, the intangibles have never been in question. It's always been about whether or not he can consistently deliver the football accurately when coverage is tight, because we just didn't see that very often, whether it be at Bama or at Oklahoma. Guys were always running wide open.
Right.
Could he do it when the coverage got tighter and the windows got smaller? And the answer is obviously yes. I mean, he's been terrific and has really surprised me with how quickly he's grown and how much he's elevated his play. And then for Daniel Jones, a lot of people, I think, are quick to criticize and look at the numbers, and they say, well, look at the numbers. How can you justify paying him what you're paying him? He just doesn't have the statistical evidence of being paid what he's making. And while I understand that completely, I also acknowledge that he had a very difficult circumstance his first few years with coaches that didn't know what they were doing. No disrespect to those coaches, just they didn't bring him along the way he needed to be brought along. And he was always trying to play hero ball, doing too much.
Yeah.
Like, don't do so much. You don't need to force one into the flat as a guy's breathing down your neck unblocked. Don't force one into the flat. Just take the sack or throw it in the dirt and live to play another play. And I think Brian Dable finally reached him with that. His decision-making improved. And the other thing that I've been really surprised with is just how athletic he is. The guy can move.
Yeah.
And it's not like he's ever going to blow you away with his speed, but he can keep you honest. And if you look early in Josh Allen's career, who ironically enough was coached by Brian Dable, he relied a lot on his own athleticism. And then his athleticism was always there, and then his arm caught up. Am I anticipating that kind of leap from Daniel Jones? Not necessarily. But I do think if you look at the blueprint that they used for Josh Allen's development, I think the same blueprint is being applied to Daniel Jones, and you can already start to see some of that growth and the leadership that's likely to come. Now, hey, he's got to take the next step now. I mean, he's got to go. Right. I mean, he's got to take a big leap, but will he be able to do so is anybody's guess.
Very last thing, I really appreciate your time. So you got the number one pick. You're a Bama guy. I'm an Ohio State guy. CJ Stroud, you got Bryce Young. I love watching Bryce Young. I've obviously enjoyed watching Stroud. I also know how hard it is to evaluate Ohio State quarterbacks sometimes.
Right.
Because look at the talent around him. I mean, he's throwing to top 20 picks. So where are you going? Where would you go with that pick?
I would go personally with Bryce Young, and it does take the Bama and Ohio State.
Yeah, Bryce Young is fantastic. I love watching
I don't care. I mean, like, Bama fans get mad at me. They think I go out of my way to be unbiased. Everyone else thinks I'm Alabama biased. So I guess I'm doing my job. I would go Bryce Young. Here's why. One, CJ Stroud has never taken the field with anything less than 2 first-round wide receivers. Yeah. You could say, well, Bryce Young had John Metsy, Jameson Williams. Like, he took the field as pretty good players as well. Yeah, but not this past year.
Not last year.
And they were very human along the offensive line both years that he was the starting quarterback, and he had to rely so much on his intangibles and his pocket mobility that he didn't have a clean pocket anywhere near as often as CJ Stroud. Not only did CJ Stroud have elite weapons at wide receiver, CJ Stroud also had elite weapons at tackle, right, who both are going to be, very wealthy individuals here coming up very, very soon. DeJuan Jones and Paris Johnson. I mean, they both were great. Paris can be a first-round pick. DeJuan blew away everyone at the Senior Bowl, so he's probably going to fly up the draft boards. So I don't know where he's ultimately going to come off. But either way, I mean, if you look at how many times he threw from a clean pocket, it's pretty remarkable. But the only time he didn't throw from a clean pocket was against Michigan, the both times that he played him, and then against Georgia.
Right.
Against Michigan, he didn't pass that test. Against Georgia, he did.
Right.
So I think that's what I was most impressed with. If he would have played every game the way he played against Georgia, he'd be the first pick.
Right.
But he didn't play that way all the time. And Bryce Young played that way all the time. It would be difficult for you to go back and to look at a game where his offensive line played well. I mean, his offensive line did not play well last year. They didn't play well the year before. His tackles were a liability. And he was running for his life an awful lot, and he was extending time, and he was extending plays, and he was buying time for his receivers and operating scramble drill. And I don't think I ever saw a bad tape from him. I don't think there is one. There is no Northwestern against Ohio State. So to me, I think Bryce Young is the safer pick, And that's why he would be my pick at number 1 if I were on the clock.
I like Bryce Young a lot. I loved watching him, and he made some plays against Tennessee in that one game where it's like, oh my God, not many guys can make that play, but that, and so I think either way, like if somebody goes Bryce Young and they say that, I am fine with that because I know what CJ Stroud did, but I also know what Bryce Young did and the talent that wasn't around, just like you said. So anyway, I appreciate your time, Greg. Always terrific insight and enjoyed it a lot. Thank you very much.
No, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me, John. Appreciate it, bud.
That's it for this episode. Thanks to Greg for joining me, and thank you, as always, for listening. I'll be back with another episode Tuesday night / Wednesday morning. I'll talk to you next time.